The world stopped as she extended the envelope toward him. His hands, calloused from hard labor, trembled as he touched it. "It's yours by right," she said with a firm voice, but her tear-filled eyes betrayed her composure. Inside, the paper that could change everything. The choice was now his, to accept what he never imagined he deserved, or to refuse out of pride and remain in the darkness he knew so well. The past and the future, separated only by a piece of paper and a decision. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating, from 1 to 10, and tell us what city you're tuning in from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The metallic clang of tools echoed in the auto shop like small explosions. The heavy air of oil and dust clung to his skin, and the man, with calloused hands and a weary gaze, worked in silence. Robert Peterson was 42, but his sun-weathered face and body, stooped from years of labor, made him seem much older. The small auto shop was sandwiched between a bar and a hardware store, on the outskirts of a rapidly growing city that expanded too quickly for those living on the fringes. The cars that arrived there were neither new nor shiny. They were tired hunks of metal, much like the mechanic who fixed them. "Mr. Peterson, is the Civic done?" His boss, Arnold, cut through the silence like a jackhammer. He was a portly man with a poorly trimmed beard and small eyes that always seemed to calculate how much each minute earned or cost him. "Almost there. Just a few more adjustments to the suspension. Almost doesn't pay the bills, Robert. The owner's calling every half hour. If you don't deliver it today, I'm taking it out of your paycheck." Robert merely nodded without looking up. He knew that threat well. It repeated itself like the static of an old radio. Arnold stomped out, and the mechanic returned to work. For 15 years, he had woken at 5 in the morning, taken 2 crowded buses, and arrived there to fix problems others couldn't resolve. Oil seeped between his fingers as he thought of his 10-year-old son, Matthew. The boy had the same curious gaze as his mother, Teresa, who had left when he was just 3. "She went to chase a dream," was what Robert would say when Matthew asked about his mother. But the truth was, Teresa had grown tired of that life, of that constant struggle for scraps, and had run off with a truck driver who promised her a life by the coast. The old fan spun on the ceiling, circulating warm air instead of cooling it. Robert tightened the last screw and stood up, feeling his back protest. 30 years under cars were taking their toll. He wiped his hands on the already stained rag and went to tell Arnold the job was done. The wall clock read 5:40 p.m. In 20 minutes he would be free to catch the bus back, pick Matthew up from his neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, and return to their one-bedroom apartment where they shared a mattress on the floor. The afternoon heat made the ground vibrate as he heard a commotion outside. Raised voices, a brief scream, then the hollow sound of a body falling. Something in the tone of that scream triggered an alarm within him. Robert dropped the lug wrench and ran to the street, his heart pounding, not knowing exactly why. A small circle of people had formed on the sidewalk in front of the drugstore across the street. Between the legs of the adults, Robert saw a light blue school uniform stretched out on the ground. A girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her face was pale as paper, her lips slightly purplish, and her chest rose and fell with difficulty. "Did anyone call an ambulance?" he asked, pushing his way through the crowd. "They already called, but they said it'll take at least half an hour," a woman replied, her cell phone still in hand. Robert looked at the child. Cold sweat trickled down her small forehead. This didn't seem like the kind of thing that could wait half an hour. The people around just watched, as if observing a sad movie, but without interfering with the script. "She just collapsed," explained the drugstore owner, adjusting his glasses. "She was buying chocolate with her babysitter, then suddenly she swayed and fell. The woman with her panicked and ran off to tell someone. I don't know." Robert didn't think twice. He knelt down and scooped the girl into his arms. She was as light as a rag doll. The sky blue uniform had an embroidered crest he didn't recognize, but from the quality of the fabric and the name delicately embroidered, Sophia, he knew she came from one of those exclusive private schools across town. "I'm taking her to the hospital. It's faster than waiting." "But what if something goes wrong? You don't even know the girl," someone commented. Robert was already crossing the street back to the auto shop. "Arnold, I need to borrow your car. It's an emergency." His boss appeared at the door, his face red, as if he'd been sleeping in some back corner. His eyes widened when he saw the child in his employee's arms. "What the hell is this? Are you crazy? Get that girl into one of their cars. You still have the Civic to deliver." "There's no time. She's really sick. She needs a doctor now." Arnold blocked his way, arms crossed over his ample belly. "If you walk out with that girl, you're fired. I'm serious." For a second, Robert hesitated. He couldn't lose that job. It was all he had, his only guarantee that Matthew would have food the next day. But then he felt the small body tremble in his arms, and the girl's breathing grew weaker. "Get out of the way, Arnold. Are you deaf? I said you're fired if you leave with that brat." Robert looked at his boss, at the girl, and back at his boss. Then, without another word, he turned and ran toward the main avenue. Behind him he could hear Arnold shouting, but the words no longer mattered. The county hospital was 10 blocks away. He ran as he had never run before, the girl's body nestled against his chest. Some people on the street looked startled at the grease-stained man carrying a child in a school uniform, but Robert saw nothing but the path ahead. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but something inside him said he couldn't stop. When he finally spotted the hospital's worn white facade, a wave of relief washed over him. The automatic doors opened, and he stumbled into the emergency room, gasping for breath. "Help! This girl, she collapsed. I don't know what's wrong. Her breathing's weak." A nurse quickly approached, followed by a young doctor. With a swift, professional movement, they took the girl from his arms and placed her on a gurney. "Are you the father?" the doctor asked, checking the child's vitals. "No, She collapsed in front of the auto shop where I work. Worked." "Do you know her? Do you have any family contact?" Robert shook his head. "I only know her name is Sophia, from the embroidery on her uniform." As the doctor and nurses moved away with the gurney, Robert stood in the white hallway, his grease-stained hands hanging at his sides, his breath still coming in ragged gasps. He suddenly felt out of place, as if he had been transported to another planet. The smell of alcohol and disinfectant was so different from the oil and dust of the auto shop. An elderly woman holding a baby looked at him with suspicion. Only then did Robert realize his shirt was stained with oil and grease, his face probably dirty and sweaty. He looked like a criminal, not a hero. He sat on a plastic chair in the corner of the waiting room and waited, not knowing exactly for what. Half an hour later, the doctor returned. "She's stabilized. It appears to be a severe allergic reaction. You got her here just in time. A few more minutes." The doctor didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. "Were you able to contact the family?" "Yes, the school identified her by the uniform. Her mother is already on her way. You can go if you wish. You did your part, and you did it well." Robert nodded but didn't move. Something held him there, perhaps the need to see the outcome, to know the girl would truly be all right. Or perhaps it was just the fear of returning and facing the reality that he no longer had a job. When he finally stood to leave, he saw movement at the hospital entrance. A woman rushed in, her high heels echoing on the tile floor. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back in an elegant bun. Her simple, yet obviously expensive dress contrasted with the worn environment of the public hospital. Her eyes quickly scanned the room until they found the doctor, with whom she began to speak in a low, urgent voice. Robert recognized her immediately. That must be Sophia's mother. He wanted to approach, to tell her the girl would be okay, that she had arrived in time, but something stopped him. That woman belonged to a different world than his, a world of new cars, expensive schools, and elegant dresses, a world where there was no place for a grease-stained mechanic. Silently, he headed for the exit. On his way back, walking through the streets that were now darkening with the arrival of night, Robert tried to organize his thoughts. He needed to pick up Matthew, explain to Mrs. Henderson that he might not be able to pay for his son's care in the coming days, and start thinking about where he would find another job. What would he tell his son? How? Would he explain that he had lost his job because of a girl he didn't even know? Would Matthew be able to understand that sometimes doing the right thing means paying a high price? As he walked, a certainty grew within him. He didn't regret it. If he had to do it all over again, he would do exactly the same. And that certainty, however much it wouldn't fill his stomach or pay the rent, gave him a strange sense of peace. That night, the small apartment seemed to shrink even further. Robert sat at the kitchen table, a plywood board propped on sawhorses, while Matthew slept on the mattress spread on the living room floor. The boy had asked why his father had arrived on foot, why he was so tired, why there was that strange shadow in his eyes. Robert had told a softened version. He had to help a sick child and therefore left work later. The full truth weighed like lead in his chest as he looked at the bills scattered across the table. Overdue rent, an electricity bill with a disconnection notice, Matthew's school fee, which, despite being public, required a voluntary contribution to keep the building running. The little money he had saved wouldn't last 2 weeks. The broken fan spun lazily, moving the warm air without cooling it. Robert opened the old refrigerator, almost empty, except for a pack of hot dogs, half a bottle of powdered juice, and some leftover rice and beans. His stomach rumbled, but he closed the door without taking anything. He needed to save every grain of rice, every drop of juice. "Dad?" Matthew's sleepy voice came from the living room. "Aren't you going to sleep?" Robert forced a smile. "I'm coming, son. Just organizing a few things." The boy appeared at the doorway, rubbing his eyes. He had his father's dark hair and brown eyes, but the delicate features reminded him of Teresa. He wore worn pajamas, twice too big, a hand-me-down from a distant cousin. "What you did today was really cool," Matthew said, looking at him with admiration. "Saving that girl." Robert swallowed hard. "How do you know about that? I didn't tell you that part." "Mrs. Henderson told me. Her son works at the drugstore across from the shop and saw everything. He called her and said you ran with the girl. In your arms, like a superhero." Robert lowered his gaze, not knowing what to say. A superhero who wouldn't be able to pay the rent at the end of the month. "Dad," Matthew approached, his voice now more serious than any 10-year-old's should sound. "You lost your job, didn't you? Because of the girl." There was no point in hiding it. The boy had always been too observant, too sensitive to his father's moods. Robert nodded slowly. "I did. Arnold warned me that if I left with the girl I'd be out, but she needed help, son. I couldn't wait." Instead of the reaction he expected, fear perhaps, or disappointment, Matthew smiled, a wide smile that illuminated his tired face. "Then you really are a hero. A true hero doesn't think about what he'll lose when he's saving someone." The lump in Robert's throat grew. He pulled his son into a tight hug, feeling the fragile bones beneath his skin, the smell of cheap soap in his hair. "We'll be okay," he whispered, more to himself than to the boy. "We always are, aren't we?" Matthew nodded against his chest. "Always." Then he pulled back slightly and looked into his father's eyes. "And you know what else Mrs. Henderson's son said? That the girl was rich, that she went to that fancy school, St. Thomas Academy. What if her family gives you a reward, like in the movies? Robert shook his head, smiling sadly at his son's innocence. Life isn't a movie, Matthew. People don't go around giving out rewards, especially rich people. They live in another world. But the boy didn't seem convinced. Junior's dad worked as a security guard in a building and saved a dog that was drowning in the pool. It was the building owner's dog. She gave him a better job as a supervisor. He earns double now. It's different, son. Why? The simple question went unanswered. Why was it different? Because saving a child was worth less than saving a rich person's dog? Or because Robert, deep down, didn't believe he deserved anything better than that life of sacrifice? Go to sleep, Matthew. Tomorrow I need to wake up early and start looking for work. The boy obeyed, reluctantly, shuffling his feet to the mattress in the living room. Robert stayed there, sitting at the table, listening to his son's breathing gradually deepen. When he was sure Matthew was asleep, he allowed himself to collapse. His shoulders slumped, his hands covered his face, and the tears he had held back all day finally came, silent, so as not to wake the boy. He cried for the lost job, for the hard life, for the son who deserved so much more than he could offer. He cried for his sick mother, whom he hadn't visited in months, for lack of money for the bus fare to the small rural town. He cried for Teresa, who chose to leave instead of staying and fighting, and he cried for himself, for that youthful dream to be a race car mechanic that had transformed into a daily struggle to simply survive. When the tears dried, Robert stood up, washed his face in the kitchen sink, and went to lie down beside his son. His body ached, not just from the day's physical exertion, but from a deeper, older fatigue. He closed his eyes, trying not to think about tomorrow, but sleep was slow to come. The following days passed in a blur of closed doors and pitying glances. Robert visited every auto repair shop within a 20-block radius. The answer was always the same: "We're not hiring right now," or "Leave your number and we'll call you." Some were more direct. "I already heard what happened at Arnold's shop. I don't want an employee who walks out in the middle of a shift." The rumor had spread quickly, as it always does in small communities. The mechanic who abandoned his work to help a rich girl. The versions varied. Some said he knew the girl's family, others that he was just trying to get attention. Few saw the gesture for what it truly was, an impulse of humanity. On the 4th day of searching, Robert returned home earlier than usual. The soles of his shoes were worn thin from all the walking, and his hope even thinner. He found Mrs. Henderson sitting at the apartment building door, chatting with other neighbors. All fell silent when they saw him. "Good afternoon," he mumbled, trying to pass by. "Mr. Peterson," Mrs. Henderson called out, rising with some effort. She was a woman in her early 60s, a widow who took care of her grandson and other children in the building to supplement her pension. "We were just talking about you." Robert stopped, suspicious. "Oh? And what were you saying?" The women exchanged glances until one of them, Nancy, from the apartment next to his, found the courage. "That you shouldn't have gotten involved. With all due respect, Mr. Peterson, but people like us can't go round playing the hero. We get screwed over, then nobody remembers, nobody helps. And what should I have done? Left the girl there, sick?" "You could have waited for the ambulance, couldn't you?" another neighbor replied. "Now you're out of a job with Matthew to raise. What good does that do?" Robert felt his blood boil. He wanted to retort, to say what he thought of that kind of attitude, but Mrs. Henderson intervened. "What the ladies are trying to say, Mr. Peterson, is that we're worried about you. Matthew is a good boy. He doesn't deserve to suffer." The mention of his son calmed him a little. "I know, Mrs. Henderson. I'm doing what I can. Speaking of which," she continued, adjusting her shawl over her shoulders, "there's a young lady looking for you. She came this morning asking where the mechanic who saved a girl last week lived. Robert's heart quickened. A young lady? What was she like? Well dressed, not from around here. Spoke very nicely, you know. Said she'd be back later. The other women now looked at him with renewed interest, as if his story had suddenly gained an unexpected new chapter. Robert murmured a thank you and climbed the building stairs, feeling the weight of their gazes on his back. Inside the apartment, the first thing he did was take a quick shower, scrubbing his hands thoroughly to remove the ingrained dirt from his nails and skin creases. Not that he was greasy today, but years of habit were hard to break. Afterward he shaved and put on the only shirt he had without stains or patches, saved for special occasions like Matthew's school meetings. He didn't know who this young lady was or why she was looking for him, but a timid hope began to bloom. What if the girl's family genuinely wanted to thank him? Not with money, of course. That was movie stuff, as he'd told his son, but perhaps with a job referral, a word with someone. Around 4 in the afternoon, he heard a knock at the door. He took a deep breath before opening it, trying to control the nervousness that suddenly overwhelmed him. The woman standing in the hallway was not what he expected. He had imagined someone older, perhaps a secretary or a social worker. But the person looking at him was young, probably no older than 30. She wore simple yet good quality clothes, well-cut jeans, a white cotton blouse, ballet flats. Her brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her eyes, an intense green, seemed to study him with curiosity. "Mr. Robert Peterson?" she asked her, voice soft, polite. "Yes, that's me." She smiled, extending her hand. "My name is Clara Miller. I'm Helen Maxwell's assistant. She would very much like to meet you, if possible." Robert shook the offered hand, confused. "Helen Maxwell? Sophia's mother, the girl you helped last week." The name hit him like a punch. Helen Maxwell. Now he understood why the girl's last name on the uniform had seemed familiar. The Maxwells owned one of the largest chains of car dealerships in the state. The name was on billboards, TV commercials, event sponsorships. She wants to see me? Why?" Clara smiled again, patiently. "To thank you, of course. What you did for her daughter. Well, the doctor said if Sophia had arrived at the hospital a few minutes later, the outcome could have been different." Robert swallowed hard, not knowing what to say. The woman continued, "Mrs. Maxwell would like to receive you tomorrow, if possible. I can send a car to pick you up at 10 in the morning." Well, Robert stammered, looking inside the apartment as if searching for an answer in the peeling walls. "I don't know if that's a good idea. I didn't do anything extraordinary. Anyone would have done the same." Clara's smile took on a hint of sadness. "You know that's not true. Several people saw the girl get sick and no one did anything, only you." Robert lowered his gaze, uncomfortable with the praise. "Please," Clara insisted. "It's very important to Mrs. Maxwell. Sophia would also like to meet the person who helped her." The mention of the child broke his last resistances. "All right. Tomorrow at 10. "Great!" The young woman's face lit up. "The car will be here, and don't worry about anything. Mrs. Maxwell just wants to talk. Thank you personally." When Clara left, Robert closed the door and leaned against it, feeling his heart pound in his chest. What had just happened? Helen Maxwell. The Helen Maxwell wanted to see him. It was as if a celebrity had summoned him. Matthew would arrive from school soon. What would he tell his son? That tomorrow he would go to the Maxwell mansion, probably one of those huge houses they only saw in TV shows. The boy would be thrilled, would build up expectations. Perhaps it was better not to tell him. After all, it would just be a quick visit, a formal thank you, and then he would return to his life, his job search, his daily struggle. The day dawned cloudy, with a fine drizzle that fogged up the windows and made the sidewalks slick. Robert woke before his alarm clock, his eyes fixed on the damp-stained ceiling. He hadn't slept well. The entire night had been filled with strange dreams where he ran with the girl in his arms through endless corridors, or where he stood before enormous gates that never opened. Matthew was still sleeping when he got up, silent as a cat. He had decided not to tell his son about the meeting with Helen Maxwell. Why feed hopes? It would just be a formal thank you, perhaps a handshake, and then each would return to their own world, she to mansions and luxury cars, he to job queues and overdue bills. He left a note on the kitchen table, went to sort some things out. "I'll be back after lunch. There's bread and milk in the fridge. If you need anything, ask Mrs. Henderson. Love you, Dad." By 9:30 he was ready, sitting on the edge of the frayed couch, his restless hands smoothing the crease of his pants. He had put on his only good clothes, grey dress pants and a white shirt, bought years ago for a friend's son's baptism. The clothes, stored at the back of the closet, had that peculiar smell of rarely worn items, a mix of mothballs and stagnant time. Exactly at 10 o'clock, he heard a discreet honk. Through the window, he saw a shiny black car parked in front of the building. It wasn't an extravagant limousine as he had imagined, but a luxury sedan, understated and elegant. Robert took a deep breath, grabbed his wallet and keys, and went down the stairs. The driver, a middle-aged man in a simple uniform, opened the back door. "Mr. Peterson, good morning. Ms. Miller asked me to pick you up." Robert felt out of place as he got into the car. The soft leather seats, the smell of newness, the almost absolute silence when the door closed. Everything contrasted violently with the crowded buses he usually took. His calloused hands seemed like strange objects resting on the immaculate leather. The ride lasted about 40 minutes. They left the outskirts, crossed the city centre, and headed towards the upscale district, where the affluent developments were located. Robert watched through the window as the landscape gradually changed, the buildings becoming newer and taller, the streets cleaner, the trees greener and well-maintained. It was as if he were entering another city, a parallel and improved version of the one he knew. The car finally stopped before an imposing gate. It wasn't a gated community, as Robert expected, but an independent house, a modern mansion, with straight lines and large glass windows. The driver exchanged a few words with the security guard, and the gate slid, open silently, revealing a path of light-colored stones that snaked through a meticulously maintained garden. "Mrs. Maxwell will receive you in the main house," the driver said, as the car slowly advanced up the path. "Ms. Miller will be waiting at the entrance." Robert merely nodded, his throat suddenly dry. What was he doing there? He felt like a fish out of water, as if at any moment someone would realize the mistake and send him back to his world. The house was even more impressive up close. White walls contrasted with dark wood structures, and the floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the cloudy sky. Clara waited at the entrance, dressed simply but elegantly as she had been the day before. She smiled when she saw him get out of the car. "Mr. Peterson, so glad you came. Mrs. Maxwell is eager to meet you." "Thank you for picking me up," he replied, his voice softer than he intended. It's a beautiful house." Clara nodded, gesturing for him to follow her. "Helen, Mrs. Maxwell, is an architect. She designed this house herself after her husband passed away." The information caught Robert by surprise. "I'm sorry, I didn't know she was a widow." "It's been 5 years. A plane crash. It was difficult, especially for Sophia." Robert followed Clara through a wide, minimalist entrance hall. White marble floors, some modern sculptures, and on the walls, black and white photographs that seemed to tell the story of a family, a smiling man, the woman he had seen at the hospital, and a girl at different ages, including wearing the same light blue school uniform. "This way, please." Clara led him to a spacious living room with windows overlooking an inner garden. The decor was elegant without being ostentatious. Dark, wood furniture, light fabric sofas, some strategically placed plants. The white walls displayed more photographs and some abstract paintings. "Make yourself comfortable. Mrs. Maxwell will be right in. Would you like some coffee juice?" "Coffee, please," Robert replied, grateful to have something to occupy his hands. Clara left, leaving him alone. Robert remained standing, too uncomfortable to sit on any of those sofas that seemed never to have been used. He approached the window and looked out at the inner garden, a small green oasis with a water fountain in the center. He was so absorbed in observing the landscape that he didn't hear the approaching footsteps. A feminine voice surprised him. "It's beautiful, isn't it? Sometimes I spend hours looking at this garden. It helps me think." Robert turned quickly. At the living room door stood the woman he had briefly seen at the hospital. Now, without the filter of anxiety and fear, he could observe her better. She was tall and elegant, with dark hair cut to shoulder length. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, more casual than he expected. She didn't appear to be wearing makeup, and some fine lines around her eyes and mouth suggested she was in her 40s, but what struck him most were her eyes, a deep, intense blue that contrasted with her lightly tanned skin. "Mrs. Maxwell," Robert stammered, unsure how exactly he should greet her. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I mean, formally." She smiled, extending her hand. "Please call me Helen, and the pleasure is all mine, Mr. Peterson. Or may I call you Robert?" "Of course you can call me Robert." He shook the offered hand, noting that despite her delicate appearance, her grip was firm. Helen gestured to the sofa. "Please sit. Clara should be bringing coffee shortly." Robert obeyed, trying to sit in a way that occupied the least possible space on the large, soft sofa. Helen sat in an armchair opposite him, legs crossed in a relaxed posture, as if receiving an old friend and not a stranger from another social world. "First of all," she began, her tone serious, "I want to thank you for what you did for Sophia. The doctor said her allergic reaction was severe. If she hadn't gotten to the hospital so quickly—" Her voice trailed off for an instant, and she took a deep breath before continuing, "Well, let's just say I have a lot to be grateful for." "You don't need to thank me," Robert replied, uncomfortable with the recognition. "Anyone would have done the same." Helen tilted her head slightly, her blue eyes studying him intently. "No, Robert, they wouldn't have. Clara investigated what happened that day. Several people saw my daughter get sick. Some even stopped to look. But only you acted. Only you had the courage to pick her up and run 10 blocks to the hospital." Robert lowered his gaze, not knowing what to reply. At that moment, Clara entered with a tray, temporarily saving him from embarrassment. She served coffee to both of them and discreetly withdrew. "Clara also told me you lost your job because of it," Helen continued, after taking a sip of coffee. Robert swallowed hard. "How did she know that?" "I have my methods," she smiled, as if reading his thoughts. "After Sophia recovered, I wanted to know everything about the man who saved her. It wasn't difficult. The neighborhood talked quite a bit." "I don't want you to think I came here expecting anything," Robert hastened to clarify. "I didn't do what I did thinking of a reward or—" Helen raised her hand, interrupting him gently. "I know that. In fact, that's part of what impressed me. You risked your job, your livelihood, for a child you didn't even know." She paused, taking another sip of coffee before continuing. "May I ask why you did it? What went through your mind at that moment?" The question caught Robert by surprise. He had never really stopped to analyze the impulse that led him to act that way. "I guess I didn't think much, to be honest. I saw the girl there, sick, everyone just standing around, watching, and I knew she couldn't wait. I just did what felt right at the moment." Helen nodded slowly, as if the answer confirmed something she already suspected. "And what about your boss? He warned you that you'd be fired, didn't he?" "Yes," Robert admitted. "But at that instant, your daughter's life seemed more important than my job." A comfortable silence fell between them, as both drank their coffee. Through the window, Robert saw that the drizzle had stopped, and a timid ray of sun now penetrated the garden, reflecting in the fountain's water. "Robert," Helen finally broke the silence, placing her cup on the coffee table. "I'd like to make you a proposition, not as payment or a reward for what you did. I know that would offend your dignity, but as a recognition of the kind of person you are." Robert felt his heart quicken. "What kind of proposition?" "I need someone to take care of the car maintenance here at the house, someone I can trust completely. Someone like you." The offer left him speechless. "Work here? In this house?" "I know you're a mechanic," she continued without waiting for a reply. "And from what I've gathered, an excellent one. We have a spacious garage with all the necessary equipment. The salary would, of course, be superior to what you received at the auto shop, and you would have an apartment on the property should you want to live closer." I don't know what to say," Robert stammered, his mind spinning with the possibilities. "A better job, a better place to live with Matthew." "You don't need to answer now," Helen smiled, understanding. "I know it's an important decision, one that affects not only you, but also your son." The shock must have been visible on his face, because she quickly added, "Matthew, isn't it? He's 10 years old. Clara found that out too." Robert nodded slowly, still trying to process everything. "Mrs. Maxwell, Helen, this is very generous, but why? Why me?" Helen stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden for a few moments before replying. When she turned, there was something different in her eyes, a mix of sadness and determination. "Because people like you are rare, Robert. People who do the right thing, even when it costs them dearly. People who put the life of an unknown child above their own livelihood." She paused, as if choosing her next words carefully. "I lost my husband 5 years ago. Since then I've met many people, rich, powerful, influential people. Do you know what I've discovered? That most only care about themselves. That they would do anything for money or status, but few would risk something of their own to help a stranger." Robert felt the weight of her words, the sincerity they carried. "So," she concluded, sitting back down, "it's not charity or a reward. It's simply recognizing value where it exists, and I would very much like you to accept." Before Robert could reply, they heard light footsteps in the hallway. The living room door opened, and a small figure appeared. The girl in the blue uniform, now wearing jeans and a floral print t-shirt. Sophia. Her brown hair was tied in 2 braids, and her eyes, the same intense blue as her mother's, sparkled with curiosity. "Mom!" "Clara said the man who helped me is here," she said, her voice still childlike, but with a surprisingly mature articulation for someone so young. Helen smiled, extending her hand to her daughter. "Yes, dear. This is Mr. Robert. He's the one who took you to the hospital when you got sick." Sophia approached shyly, studying Robert intently. Suddenly, without warning, she stepped forward and hugged him. "Thank you for saving me," she said, her voice slightly muffled against his chest. Robert, surprised and moved by the spontaneous gesture, gently returned the hug. "It was nothing, little one. I'm glad you're well." Sophia pulled back a little, still looking at him with those huge, serious eyes. "Clara said you lost your job because of me. I'm sorry." The child's sincerity almost broke Robert's composure. "It wasn't your fault, Sophia. I would do it all again if I had to." The girl smiled, revealing a missing front tooth, a reminder that, despite her articulate speech and serious gaze, she was still just an 8-year-old child. Helen watched the interaction with a soft smile on her lips. "Sophia," she finally said, "Mr. Robert and I were talking about something important. Can you go back to your room? I promise you can talk more with him before he leaves." The girl nodded, a little reluctantly. Before leaving, she looked at Robert one more time and said, "I hope you accept to work here. Then you can teach me about cars. I like cars." After she left, Helen turned her attention back to Robert. "So, what do you say?" Robert took a deep breath. He thought of Matthew, of the small, damp apartment, of the overdue bills, of the doors that closed each day. He thought of the opportunity he never imagined he'd have, and he thought of the sincerity he had seen in Helen's and Sophia's eyes. "I accept," he finally said, "and I appreciate your trust." Helen's smile lit up her face, transforming her for an instant. "Excellent. Clara will take care of the details. When can you start?" "Tomorrow, if you like." "Perfect. And what about the apartment here on the property? It would be good for Matthew, too. There's a good school nearby." Robert hesitated. It was a lot of change at once. "If you don't mind, I'd prefer to think about that a little more. The job is already a big change. I want to make sure it works out before moving my son to a new school and neighborhood." Helen nodded, respecting his decision. "Of course, I understand perfectly. There's no rush." She stood up, indicating that the meeting was ending. "Clara will show you the garage and the apartment in case you change your mind, and she'll explain the job details." When Robert also stood, Helen extended her hand. As he shook it, she maintained the contact for a moment longer than necessary, looking directly into his eyes. "Thank you for saving my daughter, Robert. I'll never forget it." The warmth and sincerity of those words stayed with him long after he left the mansion, throughout the drive back to his small apartment where Matthew awaited him, eager for news. The first week at the new job passed like a strange, vivid dream. Robert woke at 6 in the morning, prepared breakfast for Matthew, dropped him off at school, and caught the bus to the Maxwell mansion. The trip, which would have been unthinkable on his tight budget before, was now possible thanks to the advance Helen had insisted on giving him. "To reorganize your life," she had said, with that elegant practicality that seemed to characterize everything she did. The garage was everything a mechanic could dream of, spacious, impeccably organized, with state-of-the-art equipment Robert had only seen in specialized magazines. There were 5 cars, a luxury sedan, the same one that had picked him up on the first day, an imposing SUV, a red sports car that rarely left the garage, a small hatchback used by Clara for errands, and a minivan that served to take Sophia to school and other activities. The work itself wasn't difficult. The cars were in excellent condition, needing only regular maintenance and minor adjustments. Robert had authorization to drive any of them to test after repairs, something that initially made him nervous. He had never driven such expensive vehicles. But he soon discovered that, under the hood, cars were just cars, no matter the price. They had the same principles, the same basic parts, the same mechanical logic. What truly surprised him was the trust Helen placed in him. After just 2 days, she had given him a set of keys to the garage, the side gate, and even a spare key to the main house for emergencies. On the 3rd day, she had left a corporate card in his name to buy parts and equipment he deemed necessary. "I trust your judgment," she had said without fanfare, as if it were normal to hand a credit card with no limit to someone she barely knew. In that first week, Robert saw Helen only twice. She worked a lot, leaving early and returning late from her architectural office downtown. When they crossed paths, they spoke briefly. She always asked if he needed anything, if he was adjusting well, if he had any questions about the job. She was polite and distant, like a good employer, nothing more. Who Robert saw more frequently was Clara, who coordinated everything in the house with discreet efficiency, And Sophia, the girl, appeared in the garage almost daily after school, full of questions about engines and how things worked. At first, Robert had been hesitant. It wasn't appropriate for the boss's daughter to spend so much time with the mechanic. But Clara had reassured him. Helen knows. In fact, she's happy Sophia has taken an interest in something other than that tablet. On Friday, late in the afternoon, Robert was finishing an oil change on the SUV when he heard light footsteps approaching. He turned, expecting to see Sophia, but it was Helen who entered the garage. She wore a simple, yet elegant dress, and her hair was loose, falling over her shoulders, a different sight from the woman in a business suit and pinned-up hair he had seen on other days. "Robert, may I steal a minute of your time?" He straightened up quickly, wiping his hands on the rag. "Of course, Mrs. Helen," he corrected himself, still not used to the informality she preferred. "How was your first week?" she asked, approaching to observe the work he was doing on the car. "Excellent," he replied sincerely. "The garage is incredible. The cars are in great shape. It's a dream to work with equipment like this." Helen smiled, and Robert noticed how her face transformed when she smiled. The lines of worry disappeared. Her eyes gained a different sparkle. "I'm happy to hear that. Sophia won't stop talking about you. It seems you've gained a fan." Robert felt his face warm. "She's a very smart girl. She asks questions adults wouldn't even think of. Yes, she's always been like that." A touch of pride colored Helen's voice. "Listen, I'm going to pick Sophia up from a friend's house. We'll be back for dinner. Would you like to join us? Nothing formal, just a meal to celebrate your first week here." The invitation caught him by surprise. "Dinner with the boss? In the main house? Well, unless you have other plans for tonight," she added quickly. "No, I don't," Robert replied, recovering from the initial shock. "It's just that I need to pick my son up from school and—" "Bring him too," Helen suggested naturally. "Sophia will be happy to meet someone closer to her age, and I imagine he must be curious about where his father is working." It was true. Matthew wouldn't stop asking questions. About the mansion, the cars, what the rich lady who hired his father was like. Robert had tried to be discreet, not wanting to feed fantasies, but the boy had too overactive an imagination. "Are you sure it wouldn't be an inconvenience?" Helen shook her head, amused. "Of course not. It would be a pleasure to meet your son. Clara is already preparing dinner for 3. Just let her know we'll be 5. Then, thank you. We'll come." "Great. Around 7 is good? That gives you time to pick up Matthew and perhaps go home to change if you wish." Robert nodded, still a little stunned by the unexpected invitation. "Perfect. We'll see you later then." Helen turned to leave, but stopped at the garage door and added, as if it were an unimportant detail, "Oh, and Robert, I've been thinking about that apartment idea here on the property. There's an annex in the back that we're not using. I had it renovated. It should be ready in 2 weeks. If you're still interested, it's yours." Before he could reply, she had already left, leaving him alone with his swirling thoughts and the smell of new oil in the air. "Dad, is this where you work? It looks like a palace." Matthew looked out the taxi window with wide eyes as they passed through the main gate of the Maxwell mansion. Robert smiled, seeing his son practically vibrating with excitement in the back seat. He was wearing his best outfit, patch-free jeans and a plaid shirt he'd gotten for his last birthday, and had spent so much time trying to tame his unruly hair with water that they were 10 minutes late. "It's not a palace, son. It's just a big house." "Big? Dad, this is gigantic. Look at this garden. And is that a fountain?" The taxi stopped in front of the main entrance. Robert paid the fare, still feeling strange that he could do so without counting coins, and got out with Matthew. The boy stood still for a few seconds, taking in the sight of the mansion lit against the darkening sky. "Do you think they have a pool?" he whispered, as if asking a forbidden question. Robert chuckled, ruffling his son's hair that he had tried so hard to style. "I don't know. I've never seen the back of the house." The door opened before they even rang the doorbell. Clara greeted them with a warm smile. "Welcome! You must be Matthew. Helen and Sophia are in the dining room. Please follow me." Matthew gripped his father's hand as they walked down the illuminated hallway. His eyes darted from one detail to another, the paintings on the walls, the marble floor, the sculptures in the niches. Robert felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. Pride at being able to show his son a different world, apprehension at the abyss that separated this world from theirs. The dining room was smaller and cozier than he expected. A dark wood table for 8 dominated the room, but only one end was set with 4 places. Helen and Sophia were already seated, talking in low voices, but they stood when Robert and Matthew entered. "Robert, so glad you came." Helen smiled, approaching to greet them. She wore the same simple dress from the afternoon, no jewelry except small pearl earrings. None of the ostentation Robert had feared. "And you must be Matthew. Sophia talks about you a lot." "About me?" Matthew asked, surprised, looking at the girl who approached shyly. "Well, I talk about Robert's son," Sophia corrected, with that peculiar mix of shyness and articulation Robert had noticed before. "My dad was also a mechanic. I mean, he understood cars. He had a collection." "Henry loved classic cars," Helen explained, guiding them to the table. "It was almost an obsession for him. That's why we have that Porsche in the garage. It was the last one he restored before—" Her voice faltered slightly, and Robert realized that, even after 5 years, the loss was still an open wound. Sophia quickly changed the subject, turning to Matthew. "Do you like video games?" "I have a Nintendo Switch. We can play after dinner if your mom lets you." Matthew cast an uncertain glance at his father. Robert realized the mistake, but before he could correct it, Helen gently intervened. "Sophia, Matthew lives only with his dad, just like you live only with me, remember?" The girl nodded, understanding immediately. "Sorry, so if your dad lets you?" Matthew looked hopefully at Robert, who smiled and nodded. "After dinner, if it's not too late." "All right, kids," Helen said, indicating their places at the table. "Let's eat first. Clara prepared something special today." Dinner proceeded in a surprisingly relaxed atmosphere. Clara served a simple but delicious meal: grilled fish fillet, rice with herbs, sautéed vegetables. None of the extravagant food Robert had feared he wouldn't know how to eat correctly. Helen skillfully led the conversation, asking Matthew about school, his friends, what he liked to do in his free time. The boy, initially shy, soon loosened up, especially when he discovered that Helen also liked to draw. "My dad says I draw very well," Matthew confided between bites. "One day I want to be an architect like you." "Is that so?" Helen smiled, genuinely interested. "You know, I started drawing imaginary houses when I was about your age. Maybe one day you can visit my office and see what the work is like." Matthew's eyes lit up at the possibility. Robert observed the interaction, impressed by the naturalness with which Helen treated his son, without condescension, without that false cheerfulness adults often use with children. She spoke to him as an equal, a small adult in the making. After dessert, a homemade pudding that drew sighs of delight from Matthew, the children excused themselves to go play video games in Sophia's. No room. Helen poured coffee for herself and Robert and suggested they go to the terrace. "The nights are still warm, and the view of the city lights is beautiful from here." The terrace was at the back of the house, offering a panoramic view of the illuminated garden, and beyond, the city lights spread out like a carpet of stars. Robert finally had his answer. Yes, there was a pool, elegantly integrated into the garden landscape. They sat in comfortable wicker armchairs. For a few minutes, They simply enjoyed the view in silence, sipping their coffee. It was Helen who finally broke the silence. "Your son is charming, Robert, very polite and intelligent. Thank you. I do my best, but it's not always easy." "I can imagine," she replied, her gaze lost in the darkness of the garden. "It's not easy for me with Sophia either. Even with all the material comforts, her father's absence weighs heavily." Robert felt a wave of empathy. Despite the obvious differences in their financial situations, they shared the same struggle, raising a child alone. "How do you cope with it?" Helen asked, turning to face him. "With all the doubts, the fears? Sometimes I find myself wondering if I'm doing the right thing, if Henry would approve of my decisions." The question, so personal and vulnerable, surprised Robert. He didn't expect Helen Maxwell, with all her confidence and competence, to feel the same insecurities he did. "Day by day," he replied honestly. "I don't have a grand plan. I just try to do the best I can at each moment, teach right from wrong, and hope I'm not messing everything up." He paused, then added, "But Matthew is a good boy, strong, kind. Sometimes I think he got all the good that was. In me and his mother, and none of the bad." Helen smiled, a soft, slightly sad smile. "That's a good way to look at things." She twirled her coffee cup between her hands, thoughtful. "Robert, may I ask you something personal? Where is Matthew's mother? Are you separated?" "She left," Robert replied, feeling the old lump in his throat that always came when he spoke of Teresa. "When Matthew was 3 years old, she said she couldn't take that life anymore, the constant struggle to survive. She left with a truck driver who promised her a better life." "I'm so sorry," Helen said with genuine compassion. "That must have been very difficult." "It was. At first I thought I couldn't do it. Raising a child, working, keeping a home. It seemed impossible. But you find strengths you didn't even know you had." Helen nodded, understanding. "I know exactly what you mean. When Henry died, I thought the world had ended. I couldn't see how to move forward. Sophia was only 3 years old, just like your Matthew. She didn't even fully understand what had happened. She kept asking when her father would come back from his trip." Robert imagined the scene, the same pain he had felt, but with the added weight of death, of the finality that didn't exist in his case. Teresa could one day return, if she regretted it. Henry would never return. "How did you manage? To move forward, I mean?" Helen took a deep breath before answering. "At first, it was for Sophia. I got out of bed every day just because she needed me. Then, I started to understand that life goes on, even when we think it shouldn't. And that Henry would never forgive me if I gave up on living." Their gazes met in the dim light of the terrace, and Robert felt an unexpected connection. In that moment, they were not boss and employee, rich and poor, but just two people who understood each other's pain. The moment was broken by the sound of laughter coming from inside the house. Sophia and Matthew appeared at the terrace door, animated and noisy. "Mom! Matthew is really good at Mario Kart. He beat me 3 times in a row." "It was nothing," Matthew said, blushing slightly. "It's just because I play at Luke's house sometimes." Robert looked at his watch. "It was past 9. It's getting late, son. We have to go. You have school tomorrow." Matthew's face fell in disappointment. "Already? But Sophia was going to show me her manga collection." "They can wait for next time," Helen intervened gently. "If your dad allows it, of course. Maybe on the weekend." Robert hesitated. Was it an invitation to return, to strengthen the ties between their families, or just a social courtesy? "Of course," he finally replied, "if it's no trouble." "Not at all," Helen smiled. "In fact, I'm thinking of having lunch on Sunday. Nothing formal, just the 4 of us. What do you think?" Before Robert could answer, Matthew exclaimed, "Can we swim in the pool?" "Matthew!" Robert reprimanded him, embarrassed. Don't be rude, Helen laughed. It's all right. And yes, Matthew, you can use the pool. It's been a while since Sophia invited a friend to swim. Cool, Sophia and Matthew exclaimed in unison. On the way back home, in the taxi Helen had insisted on calling and paying for, Matthew wouldn't stop talking. About the mansion, the games, the pool. How cool Sophia was, despite being a girl. Robert listened with a half-smile, happy for his sons. Excitement, but also worried. They were entering a world that wasn't theirs. What would happen when, inevitably, they had to leave? "Dad," Matthew said suddenly, his voice now serious. "Helen is nice, isn't she? Not stuck up or anything, like Luke's mum." "No, she's not stuck up," Robert agreed, thinking about how Helen had spoken to Matthew as an equal, how she had shown genuine interest in what he had to say. "She looks at you in a strange way," the boy commented, with that sharp observation typical of children. "What do you mean, strange?" "I don't know how to explain it. Kind of like how Miss Evans looks at the gym teacher." Robert felt his face flush and thanked the taxi's dimness for hiding his embarrassment. "Don't be silly, Matthew. Helen is my boss, that's all." "If you say so." The boy shrugged, turning his attention to the city lights passing by the window. After a moment he added softly, "But she's pretty, isn't she? And nice. And Sophia's dad liked cars just like you." Robert didn't answer. He looked out the window, watching the streets gradually change as they moved away from the affluent neighborhoods and approached his reality. But for the first time in many years, he didn't feel only the weight of that reality. He also felt something new, undefined, a kind of hope he dared not name. The following weeks passed at a pace different from anything Robert had ever experienced. The work in the Maxwell garage was enjoyable, almost therapeutic, without Arnold's constant pressure, without impatient clients, without the worry that every lost minute meant money that wouldn't come in at the end of the day. For the first time in years, he felt valued for what he did, not just tolerated, as a necessary cog in a machine. Sunday lunch had become a weekly tradition. Robert and Matthew arrived around noon. The children disappeared to play video games or swim in the pool, while he and Helen prepared the meal together. This had been her idea. "I hate standing around while other people work," and it had become one of Robert's favorite moments of the week. In the spacious modern kitchen, between slicing vegetables and tasting seasonings, social barriers seemed to dissolve. They were just two people cooking, talking, occasionally laughing at a shared story or memory. "I never thought you'd be such a good cook," Robert commented one of those Sundays, as Helen stirred a fresh tomato sauce in the pan. "Why? Did you think rich people only know how to open champagne bottles and give orders?" She smiled, without malice in her teasing. Robert felt his face flush. "No, it's just that I imagined you always had someone to cook for you." "And normally I do," she admitted. "Clara is an excellent cook, but I learned to manage when Henry died. In the first few months I couldn't have anyone around, so it was just me, Sophia, and the kitchen. I discovered that chopping onions is great when you need to cry without feeling guilty." Robert paused, slicing the bread for a moment, observing Helen's profile against the light streaming in through the kitchen window. There was a vulnerability in her when she spoke of her husband, a crack in the armor of competence and control she normally displayed. This vulnerability somehow made her even more impressive in his eyes. "And you?" Helen asked, turning to face him. "Where did you learn to cook like that? That bread you make?" "My mother," Robert replied, returning his attention to the dough. "She had a small bakery in a small rural town. She'd get up at 4 every morning to bake fresh bread. She did that until a few months ago when her arthritis got much worse." "She doesn't work anymore?" Robert shook his head. "My younger brother takes care of her now. He took over the bakery, but it's not the same. My mother had a special touch, you know." "Like you with cars," Helen observed. "It's different." No, it's not. It's exactly the same thing. That love for what you do, that knowledge that goes beyond the technical, that becomes instinctive. She tasted the sauce and added a little salt. When are you going to visit her? The question caught Robert by surprise. I don't know. It's been over a year. It's far, and the buses are expensive, and I never had enough time off. Take a week, Helen said simply. Go see your mother, with your first full paycheck. I can't do that. I just started working here, and... Of course you can. The cars will survive a week without you, and your mother will be happy to see you and Matthew. Robert thought of his mother in the small house behind the bakery, her hands wrinkled and calloused from decades of work. The usual lump formed in his throat. It would be nice, he finally admitted. Matthew misses her, and so do I. Helen smiled, that warm smile that seemed to light up the kitchen more than the sun outside. Then it settled. You can go on the next long holiday weekend. And don't worry about the costs. Consider it an expense allowance from the company. Company? Well, me. Whatever. She waved a dismissive hand. The important thing is that you see your mother. Robert wanted to protest, to say that he didn't need charity, that he could pay for his own trip. But something in Helen's tone, not pity but genuine concern, silenced him. Instead, he mumbled a thank you and went back to slicing the bread. The apartment in the back of the Maxwell property was ready. One Friday afternoon, 2 weeks after starting his new job, Clara handed him a set of keys with a discreet smile. Helen asked me to show you the space when you have a moment. Robert followed her, curious and somewhat apprehensive. They walked along the side of the mansion, then down a stone path that wound between well-maintained trees until they reached a structure separate from the main house. It was a modern building with simple lines, large glass windows, and a small balcony. It used to be Helen's painting studio, Clara explained as she unlocked the door. After Mr. Henry passed away, she stopped painting. It's been closed for years. The interior surprised Robert. He expected something basic, functional, like the staff quarters he had seen on other properties. Instead, he found a welcoming and elegant space. The living room was large, with a comfortable sofa, a flat-screen television on the wall, and a small dining table near the open-plan kitchen. Large windows let in abundant natural light and offered a view of a small, private garden. The kitchen is fully equipped, Clara continued, opening cabinets and drawers. Refrigerator, stove, microwave, washing machine in the closet there. The master bedroom is at the end of the hall, and there's a smaller second bedroom, perfect for Matthew. The bathroom is here. Robert followed her in silence, trying to process what he was seeing. The master bedroom had a queen-size bed with sheets that seemed never to have been used, a built-in closet and a small desk. Matthew's room, because it was clearly for him, had a twin bed, a bookshelf with some children's books, and a study desk. Helen chose everything personally, Clara commented, noticing his surprised look at the bookshelf. She said she didn't know what Matthew liked, but that every 10-year-old boy should have adventure books. Robert felt a wave of emotion he couldn't define. Gratitude, yes, but also something more complicated. A mix of discomfort at accepting such generosity and admiration for Helen's sensitivity and thinking, of the details that would make his son feel at home. It's too much, he finally managed to say. I can't accept. It must have cost a fortune to renovate all this. Clara smiled patiently. The structure was already there. And as for the rest, Helen is an architect. Furnishing spaces is what she does. Besides, she added in a more confidential tone, she enjoyed doing it. I haven't seen her so excited about a personal project in years. Robert ran his hand over the kitchen counter, feeling the smooth, cold surface beneath his calloused fingers. Even so, it's much more than I need, and the rent will consume my entire salary. Clara looked at him with surprise. Rent? No, Mr. Peterson. The apartment comes with the job. It's part of the package. That doesn't seem right, he murmured, more to himself than to Clara. If you'll permit my sincerity, she replied gently but firmly, I think you're seeing problems where none exist. Helen isn't doing charity. She values having someone trustworthy living on the property. It's also a matter of security. Robert wanted to believe that, but he still felt uncomfortable. It all seemed too good to be true, and his life experience had taught him that when something seems too good, there's usually a hidden price to pay. "Dad, you're kidding, right?" Matthew exclaimed, his eyes wide, running from one room to another in the apartment. "We're going to live here? For real?" It was Saturday morning. Robert had finally decided to show his son the apartment, although he still wasn't sure if he would accept the offer. Matthew's reaction, however, made the decision more difficult. "Maybe, son, I'm thinking about it." "Thinking? But Dad, look at this. It has a huge TV, and my room even has a desk, and look out the window. You can see the pool from here." Robert sighed. How to explain to a 10-year-old boy the complex emotions that prevented him from simply accepting what seemed like an incredible opportunity? The wounded pride, the fear of depending too much on a single person, the apprehension that everything could disappear as quickly as it had appeared. "Matthew, we need to talk. Sit down here." He gestured to the sofa, and the boy obeyed, though still looking around in wonder. "I know it seems incredible, but I need you to understand a few things. First, this place isn't ours. It comes with the job. If one day I don't work for Helen anymore." "But you're the best mechanic in the world. Why would she fire you?" Robert smiled at his son's absolute confidence. "Thank you, champ. But things happen. People change their minds. And also, if we come to live here, you'll have to change schools. You'll be far from your friends, from Luke, from Mrs. Henderson." "But I'll go to a better school, won't I? And I can visit Luke on weekends, and Sophia will be my friend." Matthew's simple, direct logic made it difficult to argue. Robert tried another approach. "And our house, we have a home there, small but ours. Here we'll always be guests." Matthew's face suddenly became serious, and he looked at his father with an expression surprisingly mature for someone so young. "Dad, that's not a real house. It's a dump. It leaks when there's a storm. There are roaches in the kitchen, and you're always worried about the rent." He paused as if carefully choosing his next words. "I know you do your best, you always have, but if we have a chance to live in a nice place like this, why not accept?" Robert felt a lump in his throat. It was true. The apartment on the outskirts barely deserved to be called a home. But it was all he had managed to provide for his son in the past 7 years, since Teresa left. He had clung to the idea that despite all the difficulties, at least he provided a roof for his son. And now, to realize that Matthew saw that place as a dump. "You're right," he finally admitted. I'm scared, you know." "Scared of what?" "How to explain. Scared of getting used to a better life and then losing it. Scared that Matthew would start desiring things he could never provide on his own. Scared that somehow, by accepting so much generosity from Helen, he was creating a debt impossible to repay." "Scared it won't work out," he simply replied, "that we'll have to go back to where we were after knowing something better." Matthew considered this for a moment, then shrugged with the carefree wisdom of youth. "But what if it does work out? What if it's the start of a better life? Like you always say, we have to try, right?" Robert couldn't help but smile. His own advice, repeated over the years when Matthew faced some challenge at school or with friends, now came back to haunt him. He pulled his son into a tight hug, inhaling the smell of cheap shampoo in his unruly hair. "When did you get so smart, huh?" Matthew laughed. "I learned from the best." "So, you're moving in?" Helen asked, unable to hide the excitement in her voice. It was late afternoon, and she had appeared in the garage just as Robert finished organizing his tools. "Yes," he replied, still not entirely convinced he was doing the right thing. Matthew's thrilled. "I think if I said no, he'd run away from home and come live here anyway." Helen laughed, the sound clear and genuine echoing through the garage. "I'm happy. Sophia is excited too. She and Matthew get along well, don't they? It's good to see her like this, energetic, making plans. Since her father died, she's been very withdrawn, too serious for her age." Robert nodded, understanding perfectly. Matthew also had a difficult phase after his mother left. Kids are stronger than they seem. But even so, it leaves scars. "Yes, it does," Helen agreed thoughtfully. Then, as if making a sudden decision, she added, "Robert, I wanted to ask you something. It's a delicate matter." Her serious tone put him on alert. "Of course you can ask." "It's about the Porsche in the garage, the red one. It was Henry's favorite. He restored it completely, piece by piece. It was his project, you know. When he wasn't at the office, he was in the garage, tinkering with that car." Robert nodded, beginning to understand where she was going with this. "After he died, I couldn't bring myself to sell the car. I also can't drive it. It just sits there like a kind of memorial. But every now and then I hear strange noises. I don't think a car should sit idle for so long, should it?" "No, it shouldn't," Robert confirmed. "Engines need to run regularly. Oil needs to circulate. Without use, parts deteriorate." "That's what I feared." Helen took a deep breath before continuing. "I'd like you to drive it, regularly, to keep it in good condition. Would that be possible?" Robert looked at her, surprised. The Porsche was obviously more than just a car. It was a connection to her late husband, a relic from a happier time, that she would trust him to care for such a symbolic object. "Of course," he replied, his voice a little hoarse with unexpected emotion. "It would be an honor. I'll take care of it as if it were my own." "Thank you." Helen smiled, but there was a glint of unshed tears in her eyes. "Henry would have liked you, you know. He always said you could judge a man's character by the way he treated machines." They stood in silence for a few moments, a comfortable silence laden with a mutual understanding that went beyond words. Robert realized he had never felt so at ease with anyone since ever, perhaps. "When do you plan to move?" Helen finally asked, breaking the moment. "Next weekend, probably. We don't have much to bring, so it should be quick." "Do you need help? I can arrange a truck, people to carry things." Robert shook his head, smiling. "It won't be necessary. Everything we own fits in a taxi. A bed, some clothes, Matthew's toys, my personal toolbox. The rest can stay for the next tenant." Helen looked at him with an expression he couldn't decipher, something between admiration and sadness. It must be liberating in a way, to have so little to cling to. "Sometimes," Robert admitted. "Other times, it's just a reminder of how much time I spent just surviving instead of living." He regretted the words as soon as they came out. They sounded like a complaint, like ingratitude for the life he had. "Sorry, I didn't mean to—" "Don't apologize for telling the truth," Helen gently interrupted him. "We all have our struggles, Robert. Mine are different from yours, but no less real." She glanced at the delicate watch on her wrist. "I need to go. I promised Sophia we'd watch a movie together tonight. We'll talk more later." Robert nodded, watching her leave the garage with light, decisive steps. He stayed there for a long time after she left, thinking about the strange turn his life had taken in the past few weeks. From a poorly paid mechanic, worried about the next rent payment, to, what was he now? Not just an employee, he realized. Helen treated him as something more, a friend perhaps, or was it possible that... No. He shook his head to push the thought away. She was his boss, a woman from another social world, a widow still tied to the memory of her husband, and he was just the mechanic who, by a twist of fate, had helped her daughter. Nothing more than that. But when he closed the garage and walked to the gate to leave, he couldn't help but look at the illuminated house where Helen and Sophia watched the movie together. And for a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to be part of. That scene, sitting on the same sofa, sharing the same moment, a family. The thought accompanied him throughout the journey back to the small apartment that soon they would leave behind. The move to the apartment in the back of the Maxwell property happened on a sunny spring Sunday. As Robert had predicted, all his and Matthew's belongings fit into a single taxi. The driver, seeing the few items in the trunk, asked if they hadn't forgotten anything. Robert just smiled and shook his head. An entire life reduced to a few bags and boxes. Was it sad or liberating? Not even he could say. Sophia awaited them at the side gate, bouncing with excitement. As soon as the taxi stopped, she ran to help Matthew with a box of toys. "Come on, I'll show you a secret place in the garden. We can build a fort there." And so, in a matter of seconds, the children disappeared among the trees, leaving Robert alone to organize the move. Not that there was much to organize. In less than an hour, he had put his few clothes in the spacious closets, placed his worn mechanics books on the living room shelf, and positioned his personal toolbox in a corner of the utility area. The rest of the space, and there was plenty, remained empty, further highlighting the scarcity of their possessions. He was contemplating this reality when he heard a soft knock at the door. Helen entered, carrying a basket covered with a colorful cloth. "I thought you might be hungry," she explained, placing the basket on the kitchen counter. "Clara made fresh bread this morning, and there's cheese, ham, fruit, just a snack for the afternoon." "Thank you," Robert replied, genuinely touched by the gesture. "You didn't have to bother." Helen looked around, noticing the few belongings scattered in the apartment. "You finished moving quickly." "As I said, we didn't have much." She nodded without commenting, but her eyes revealed a silent understanding. The kids disappeared. Sophia dragged Matthew off to see some secret place in the garden. Helen smiled. "Ah, that must be the old oak tree. There's a kind of clearing around it where she likes to play. It was Henry's favorite spot too. He built a small platform in the branches, almost a treehouse." She paused, as always happened when she mentioned her husband, as if needing a moment to manage the pain. "Come, let's look for them, then I can show you the rest of the property. There's an orchard in the back that yields delicious peaches in the summer." Robert followed her outside, appreciating the ease with which she included him in her life, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They walked side by side through the well-maintained garden, talking about light topics, the mild weather, plans for the week, Sophia's new interest in adventure books Matthew had recommended. They found the children exactly where Helen had predicted, under the immense oak tree, absorbed in building some kind of fort with fallen branches and an old sheet they had somehow acquired. They seemed so engrossed and happy that Robert and Helen decided not to interrupt them. "Is Matthew adapting better to the new school?" Helen asked, as they headed towards the orchard. The school transfer had been surprisingly easy. Helen knew the principal of the nearest public school. "We did a renovation project together a few years ago and had secured a spot for Matthew, even in the middle of the semester. It was a simple school, but well organized and with dedicated teachers, much better than his previous one. Yes, he's loving it. Especially the science classes. They seem to have a real lab with microscopes and everything. I'm happy to hear that. Education makes all the difference." Helen stopped to examine one of the peach trees, whose fruits were still green and small. "My father was a bricklayer, you know. He worked his whole life in construction, but he saved every penny to pay for my studies." Your mind is your tool, he used to say. The sharper it is, the better. Robert looked at her in surprise. He had never imagined Helen came from humble beginnings. There was a natural elegance about her, a way of speaking and carrying herself that suggested a lifetime of privilege. My father died before he saw me graduate as an architect, she continued, with a touch of sadness in her voice. But I think he'd be proud, not for the money or the status, but because I use what I learned to create spaces that make a difference in people's lives. I'm sure he would be, Robert replied, genuinely impressed. You built all this from scratch? Helen gestured, encompassing the property. Not alone. Henry was already successful when we met. He came from a wealthy family. He had inherited his father's dealership business. But together, we expanded everything. He had a vision for business, I for spaces. It was a good partnership. Her gaze grew distant. A partnership in every sense. Robert felt a pang of, what? Envy? Not exactly. More like a recognition of something precious he had never had. A true partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. With Teresa, it had been more survival than partnership. Each day was a battle. And eventually, she simply gave up the fight. I'm sorry for your loss, he said, feeling the inadequacy of the words in the face of the magnitude of what Helen had lost. She smiled sadly. 5 years already. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime. Other times it feels like yesterday. The worst isn't his absence, you know. It's watching Sophia grow up without a father. The moments he's missing, her questions that I don't know how to answer. I understand, Robert nodded. Matthew also asks questions about his mother, why she left, if she didn't like him, if she'll ever come back. It's difficult. What do you tell him? Robert sighed, remembering the nights Matthew, smaller and more fragile, cried, asking for his mother. The truth, as much as possible. That she loved us, but she was unhappy, and she needed to find her own path. That it wasn't his fault. And you? Helen looked him directly in the eyes. Have you forgiven her? The question, so direct and personal, caught him by surprise. No one had ever asked about his feelings regarding Teresa's departure. People assumed, made judgments, but no one asked. I'm still working on it, he replied honestly. Some days yes, some days no. I understand why she left. The life we led, it wasn't easy. I worked too much, earned too little. We never had a moment of rest. She was young, beautiful, a dreamer. She deserved more than that. And you didn't deserve it? Helen asked softly. Robert shrugged, uncomfortable. I guess I accepted that was my life. She didn't. And now? Your life has changed. It's better. Do you deserve this? The question hit him at the core of his insecurities, at the heart of that persistent discomfort he had felt since. The first day at the Maxwell mansion. Did he deserve all this positive change, or was it just a temporary stroke of luck, destined to end? I don't know, he finally admitted. Sometimes it feels like I'm living someone else's life, that at any moment someone will realize the mistake and send me back to where I belong. Helen approached, placing her hand lightly on his arm. Robert, look at me. He obeyed, meeting those intense blue eyes fixed on his. You saved my daughter. You risked your livelihood, your job, for a child you didn't even know. If anyone deserves good things, it's you. The intensity in her voice, the absolute sincerity in her gaze, left Robert speechless. For a moment, they stood there, looking at each other, something indefinable growing between them. The moment was broken by the sound of children's laughter approaching. Sophia and Matthew came running down the stone path, their faces flushed with excitement. Mom! Dad! You have to see our fort! It's incredible! The children grabbed their hands, pulling them back towards the oak tree, and the intimate conversation was left behind, but not forgotten. Weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, the new life seemed less like a temporary dream and more like a permanent reality. Matthew flourished in his new school, making friends, joining the science club, bringing home increasingly better grades. Robert settled into a comfortable routine. He took care of the cars, made small repairs around the property, and once a week took the red Porsche out for a drive, keeping it in perfect condition as he had promised Helen. Sundays continued to be reserved for their joint lunches, now a firmly established tradition. Sometimes they invited other people, Sophia or Matthew's school friends, Clara and her husband, occasionally one of Helen's friends from the architecture office, but the core were always the four. Helen, Sophia, Robert and Matthew, a small unit that, without anyone saying it aloud, began to look more and more like a family. One of those Sunday afternoons, after a particularly pleasant lunch, Robert was washing dishes in the main house kitchen, while Helen put away leftovers in the refrigerator. The children had gone out to ride bicycles on the property paths. "I don't think I've ever seen Matthew so happy," Robert commented, watching his son through the window cycling beside Sophia, both laughing at some private joke. "Nor Sophia," Helen agreed, stopping beside him to also look out the window. "Since the allergy incident, she seems more alive, less tied to the past. Kids are resilient. They move on better than we adults do." Helen looked at him sideways, a soft smile playing on her lips. "And you? Are you moving on too?" Robert felt his heart quicken. There was something in the question, a layer of meaning that went beyond the words. Or was he imagining things? "I think so," he replied cautiously. "Life is good, better than it's been in a long time." "Just good?" Helen teased gently. Robert turned to face her directly. "Very good. More than I deserve, probably." "There you go again with that deserve talk." Helen shook her head, but she was smiling. "Robert, when are you going to understand that it's not about deserving? It's about what happens, what we build with what life gives us." They stood in silence for a moment, looking at each other. Robert felt something shift in the air between them, a subtle tension, charged with unspoken possibilities. Helen was so close that he could smell her faint perfume, see the tiny golden freckles that dotted her nose and cheeks, notice how her eyes reflected the afternoon light, becoming almost transparent. "Helen," he began, not knowing exactly what he wanted to say, but feeling that he needed to say something. The sound of the phone interrupted the moment. Helen hesitated for a second before stepping away to answer. Robert turned his attention back to the dishes, trying to calm his heart that was beating too fast in his chest. "Hello?" Helen's voice sounded normal, controlled, as if the moment between them had never existed. "Yes, this is she." "What? When? My God." "Yes, I'll be there as fast as possible." Her alarmed tone made Robert turn around. Helen was pale, holding the phone so tightly that her knuckles were white. "What happened?" "It's my mother," she replied, her voice trembling. "She had a stroke. She's in the hospital, in the ICU." "I'm so sorry," Robert said, genuinely concerned. He knew Helen's mother lived alone in a neighboring town. "Is there anything I can do?" Helen seemed disoriented, a rare expression for someone normally so composed. "I need to get there. The hospital is 2 hours from here. But Sophia, I can't take her. It would be too traumatic. She's already seen too many hospitals." "She can stay here with me and Matthew," Robert offered immediately. "Don't worry about it. Go see your mother." Helen looked at him with absolute gratitude. "Are you sure? I don't know how long I'll be gone. I might need to stay there overnight. We have space in the apartment. Sophia can sleep in my room. I'll take the sofa. It's no problem." "Robert, She approached him and, in an impulsive gesture, hugged him. It was brief but intense, and when she pulled away, there were tears in the corners of her eyes. "Thank you." 20 minutes later, Helen was leaving in her car, after quickly explaining the situation to Sophia and assuring her that she would return as soon as possible. The girl, despite her obvious concern for her grandmother, seemed calm, being in Robert's care. "Dad will take care of you," Matthew said naturally, as the children waved goodbye to the departing car. "He's the best at taking care of people." Robert felt a lump in his throat hearing his son speak like that. Sophia smiled sadly and nodded as if it made perfect sense. The following hours passed in an improvised but comfortable routine. Robert prepared a simple dinner, spaghetti with tomato sauce and meatballs, a children's favorite. Afterward, they watched a movie on the apartment's small TV. The children huddled on the sofa under a blanket, even though it wasn't cold. There was something comforting in the closeness, as if they could protect each other from the uncertainties of the world outside. When it was time for bed, Robert made up his bed for Sophia, putting fresh sheets and the softest pillow he had. The girl, already in her pajamas and with brushed teeth, seemed small and vulnerable, very different from the confident girl she normally was. "Will Grandma be okay?" she asked in a low voice, as Robert helped her get settled. "Your mum will call as soon as she has news," he replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. "The doctors are taking care of her, and your mum is there too. They're doing everything they can." Sophia nodded, her eyes large and solemn, fixed on him. "You promise you won't leave? That you'll be here if I need you?" The question, so simple and direct, hit him in the heart. "I promise, Sophia. I'll be in the living room right there. Just call." The girl seemed relieved. She closed her eyes, but then opened them again, as if she had just remembered something important. "You know," she said confidentially, "Mum smiles more since you and Matthew came to live here." Robert didn't know what to say. He simply stroked the girl's hair, feeling a wave of affection that surprised him with its intensity. "Sleep well, little one." When he left the room, he found Matthew already in his own bed but still awake, watching him with attentive eyes. "You like Helen, don't you, Dad?" The direct question, typical of a child, caught him off guard. "Of course I like her. She's a good person, a good friend." Matthew rolled his eyes with childlike impatience at the evasive answer. "Not like that. Like a girlfriend." Robert felt his face flush. "Matthew, it's not that simple. Why not? You like her, she likes you, you're adults. Adults who like each other date, isn't that how it works?" If only it were as simple as Matthew made it seem. But it wasn't. There were past histories, unhealed. Wounds, social differences, expectations, fears. A labyrinth of complications that children happily didn't have to navigate. "Let's talk about this another day, okay? Now it's time to sleep." Matthew seemed dissatisfied with the answer, but accepted it, turning on his side with an exaggerated sigh. "Adults are complicated," he murmured before closing his eyes. Robert smiled, despite the confusion of emotions in his chest. "Yes, son, adults are very complicated." After making sure both children were asleep, Robert settled on the living room sofa, improvising a bed with a blanket and pillow. He was exhausted, but his brain refused to shut down. He thought of Helen, of the brief but intense hug they shared before she left, of Matthew's question, of Sophia's words about her mother smiling more. His phone rang around midnight. It was Helen. "How are the children?" was the first thing she asked, her voice hoarse with fatigue. "Sleeping soundly," he replied. "And your mother?" Helen sighed deeply. "Stable, but still in the ICU. The doctors say the next 48 hours will be critical." "I'm so sorry. I know how important she is to you." "She is. After my father died, it was just the two of us. She's strong, Always has been. But now, seeing her like this, connected to all these machines... Robert could hear the pain in her voice, the contained fear, and wished he were there to comfort her. "I'll stay here tonight," Helen continued. "Maybe a few days. Sophia—" "Don't worry about Sophia," he gently interrupted her. "She's safe here. I'll take care of her as if she were my own daughter." There was a moment of silence on the line, and then, with a choked voice, Helen said, "I know you will. I trust you, Robert, more than anyone I've met in recent years." The words, simple yet profound, made his heart race. "Helen, I need to hang up now," she gently interrupted him. "The nurse is calling. I'll call tomorrow morning." "Of course. Take care, and try to get some rest if you can. Thank you for everything." After the call ended, Robert lay in the dark, looking at the ceiling, with the feeling that something important was happening, something that went beyond a family emergency, something that stirred the foundations of the relationship they had been building over the past few months. And, for the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility he had consciously avoided. Perhaps, just perhaps, what he felt for Helen was far more complex and profound than gratitude or friendship. The thought should have frightened him, given the difference between their worlds. But strangely, it brought a sense of peace, as if he had finally admitted to himself something his heart had long known. With that thought, he fell asleep, the soft sound of the children's breathing in the adjacent rooms serving as a reminder that whatever the future held, at that moment, in some unexpected way, he had a family to care for. Helen was absent for 5 days, 5 days during which Robert fully took on Sophia's routine, along with Matthew's: breakfast preparation, backpack checks, school drop-offs, homework help, dinner, bath time, bedtime stories. Clara continued to manage the main house and helped when she could, but most of the responsibility fell on his shoulders, a weight that, surprisingly, he didn't feel as a burden, but as a privilege. The children quickly adapted to the new dynamic. Sophia, despite her constant concern for her grandmother, found comfort in Robert's stable presence and in her growing friendship with Matthew. Together, they created a small routine, a microcosm of family life that functioned surprisingly well. Helen called several times a day, in the morning to wish the children good morning before school, in the afternoon to check on their day, at night to say good night to Sophia. In each call there was a moment reserved for Robert too, a space where they spoke not only about practical matters, but shared concerns, hopes, fears. The distance, ironically, brought them closer in a way that daily coexistence hadn't managed until then. Without the glances, without the physical tension of presence, words flowed more easily. "I never thought I could trust someone I've known for so little time so much," Helen confessed on the third night, her voice soft on the phone. "It's strange, isn't it? As if we've known each other for years." "I know what you mean," Robert replied, sitting on the apartment balcony, watching the stars. The children were already asleep, and the silence of the night enveloped the property. "Sometimes life puts us exactly where, and with whom, we need to be." A short silence followed, comfortable, full of unspoken meanings. "How is your mother?" Robert finally asked. "Better. She left the ICU today. She still has a long road ahead, but the doctors are optimistic. If all goes well, I should be back tomorrow or the day after." Robert's heart quickened at the news. "That's great. Sophia will be happy. We all will be." "Robert," Helen began, then hesitated. "There's something I'd like to... When I get back, we need to talk." Her serious tone put him on alert. "Did something happen?" "No, nothing's wrong. It's just that this time here alone has made me think a lot about life, about what really matters, about us, a small word loaded with so much potential meaning. I've been thinking too," Robert admitted, his heart pounding in his chest, Then we'll talk when I get back, Helen concluded, her voice lighter now. Good night, Robert, and thank you for everything. Good night, Helen. After the call, Robert remained on the balcony for a long time, letting the night breeze caress his face, trying to organize the thoughts and feelings that mingled in his chest. There was fear, yes, fear of expecting too much, of misinterpreting, of exposing himself and being rejected. But there was also a growing certainty, an instinctive knowledge that what was happening between them was real, important, perhaps even inevitable. Helen returned on a Friday afternoon. Robert was in the garage, finishing a tire change on the SUV, when he heard the sound of a car approaching. Sophia, who was playing with Matthew in the garden, was the first to see her mother. Her cry of joy echoed through the property, and soon she was running into Helen's open arms. From afar, Robert watched the reunion. Helen knelt at the entrance, hugging her daughter tightly, both their dark hairs mingling into one shade. There was something so profoundly right about that scene that he felt a lump in his throat from emotion. He didn't want to interrupt the moment between mother and daughter, so he went back to work. But a few minutes later, he heard footsteps approaching the garage. It was Helen, with Sophia and Matthew by her side, each holding one of her hands. "Hello," she smiled, and there was something new in her eyes, a sparkle that hadn't been there before. "Welcome back," Robert replied, wiping his hands on the rag, suddenly conscious of the grease stains on his shirt. "Mum brought presents," Sophia announced excitedly, "for all of us." "Really?" Robert raised an eyebrow, looking at Helen with curiosity. "Nothing much," she shrugged, "just a few souvenirs from the town. Corn cake for the kids. It's a specialty from a traditional sweet shop there. And for you—" She paused briefly, looking him in the eyes. "Well, your present needs to wait until later, when we're alone." There was something in the way she said that, a veiled promise that made Robert's heart race. "I can't wait," he replied, holding her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. The rest of the afternoon passed in an atmosphere of quiet celebration. Helen, despite the visible fatigue from her hospital vigil, radiated renewed energy. She told the children about their grandmother. "She's better, but she'll need a lot of care," and listened attentively to the stories of the days she had been away. Matthew, initially shy in the renewed presence of the lady of the house, soon relaxed when Helen formally thanked him for taking care of Sophia alongside Robert. "You two made a great team," she commented during dinner, which Robert had prepared with care. "Clara told me everything worked perfectly." "Dad made spaghetti every day," Matthew revealed, laughing. "That's not true," Robert protested, feigning indignation. "We had pizza one night, and there was that roasted chicken, remember, that almost burned? And the cake that didn't rise," Sophia added, joining the fun. "Hey, now you're being unfair," Robert laughed. "We had an agreement. I'd handle the food. You wouldn't tell Helen how it really was." Helen watched the interaction with a soft smile, her eyes alternating between the children and Robert. There was something in her gaze, a kind of recognition, as if she were seeing for the first time something that had always been there. After dinner and dessert, the corn cake Helen brought, which the children devoured with enthusiasm, Sophia began to yawn noticeably. The days of excitement and the emotion of her mother's return had taken their toll. "I think it's time for someone to go to bed," Helen commented, stroking her daughter's hair. "Not yet," Sophia protested weakly, just as another yawn betrayed her. "How about I take you both to the apartment?" Robert suggested. "Matthew can sleep in his room, and I'll tell you a story before you go to sleep." "No," Helen intervened softly. "Sophia will sleep here tonight. I miss my girl." She paused briefly, then added, "But perhaps, after the children are asleep, we could talk a little. That conversation I mentioned on the phone." Robert nodded, feeling his heart quicken. "Of course, I'll be back in about an hour. That gives me time to put Matthew to bed and organize a few things. Perfect. I'll see you later. The night was exceptionally clear, with a nearly full moon bathing the garden in silver light. Robert walked slowly across the property toward the main house, each step conscious, as if he were marching toward a decisive moment in his life. He had put on the best clothes he had, dark dress pants, a neatly ironed light blue shirt, the only pair of shoes that weren't work boots. He had even put on a little of the cologne Matthew had given him for Father's Day, bought with months of saved allowance. Helen waited on the terrace, the same place where they had had that first sincere conversation months ago. She wore a simple cotton dress, her hair loose, falling over her shoulders, and she was barefoot, a detail that for some reason Robert found intensely intimate and charming. "Is Sophia asleep?" he asked, approaching. Helen nodded. "Like a rock. These days with you and Matthew have left her exhausted, in the best possible way." She gestured to the armchair next to hers. "Sit down. Would you like some wine? I opened a special bottle. Henry and I bought it on our honeymoon in Italy with the promise to only open it on a truly important occasion." Robert felt the weight of that gesture as he sat down. "And this is an important occasion." Helen smiled, pouring 2 glasses. "I believe so. Don't you?" The question hung between them, charged with expectation. Robert accepted the offered glass, noticing how Helen's hand trembled slightly. "Before anything else," she began after a small sip, "I want to thank you for what you did during my absence, taking care of Sophia, keeping everything running. It meant a lot to me." "It was nothing. I like her. She's an incredible girl." "Like her father," Helen said softly. Then, as if realizing what she had just said, she quickly added, "Henry, I mean, he also had this way of truly seeing people, of caring." Robert nodded, feeling a pang of, what, jealousy? No, it wasn't that. It was more like an acknowledgement of the space Henry would always occupy in Helen's and Sophia's lives, a space that deserved to be respected. He must have been a special man. He was. Helen gazed at her wineglass for a moment, thoughtful. "And for a long time, I thought I would never find anyone like that again. Someone who would make me feel safe, understood, seen." She raised her eyes, meeting Robert's with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. "And then you appeared, running with my daughter in your arms." Robert felt his throat go dry. "Helen, Please, let me finish," she asked gently. "These days at the hospital, watching my mother fight for her life, made me think a lot. About time, about opportunities, about second chances. I realized I was waiting for something, for someone, without even knowing what or who. And then I realized I didn't need to wait anymore, that what I was looking for was already here." She put her glass aside and extended her hand, lightly touching Robert's. "I know our situation is complicated. You work for me. I come from a relationship with a lot of baggage. We have children to consider, and there are probably 1,000 reasons why we should just be friends, just what we are now." Robert looked at their joined hands, feeling her warmth against his skin, marveling at the softness of that touch. "But," Helen continued, her voice firmer now, "life is too short not to take a risk, not to say what we feel. And what I feel for you, Robert, goes far beyond gratitude or friendship." The words, finally spoken aloud, hung in the night air like a revelation. Robert felt as if something within him, something that had been contained, repressed for a long time, finally broke free. He looked up to meet her eyes, those intense blue eyes, now vulnerable, expectant. "When Teresa left," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I convinced myself that I would never open myself up like that to anyone again. That my job was to take care of Matthew, to survive. and that was enough. And for years, that's how I lived, without expecting anything, without dreaming of anything beyond what I already had." He paused, searching for the right words, "And then you came into my life, not just giving me a job, a place to live, but seeing me, seeing beyond the grease-stained mechanic, seeing something I didn't even know still existed." Helen squeezed his hand, encouraging him to continue. "What I mean is that I also feel something for you, Helen, something that scares me with its intensity, with how quickly it grew, something I never thought I would feel again." She smiled, her eyes gleaming with unshed tears. "Then we're on the same page." "It seems so," Robert smiled back. "But what do we do now? How does this work?" Helen shrugged, a surprisingly casual gesture for the moment. "I don't know. I guess we figure it out together, one day at a time. We don't need to have all the answers now." Robert nodded, letting the realization of what was happening slowly wash over him. He and Helen, Helen and he, the unlikely connection between two such different worlds, united by chance, by destiny, by the kindness of an impulsive gesture. "The children will be happy," he commented, remembering Matthew's insinuations, Sophia's observation about her mother smiling more. "They'll probably say they already knew," Helen laughed softly. "Kids have a knack for seeing what we try to hide." They remained silent for a moment, simply enjoying each other's presence, the closeness, the possibility unfolding before them. "Helen," Robert finally said, may I kiss you?" The question, so direct and at the same time so respectful, made her eyes soften with tenderness. Instead of responding with words, Helen leaned forward, closing the distance between them. The kiss was soft, hesitant at first, as if both were relearning a long-forgotten language. Then it grew deeper, more confident, carrying the weight of all. They had lived, lost, and found. When they finally separated, there was a new sparkle in both their eyes, a certainty that needed no words. The wedding took place 6 months later, in a simple ceremony in the property's garden. Only close friends, family, and of course Sophia and Matthew, who were bursting with happiness. Robert's mother, recovered enough to travel, came from the small rural town with his younger brother. Helen's mother, still in a wheelchair after her stroke, was positioned in the front row, her eyes gleaming with tears as she watched her daughter walk down the makeshift aisle between the chairs. Helen wore a simple champagne silk dress, no veil or tiara, just fresh flowers in her hair. Robert, in a dark blue suit bought especially for the occasion, waited for her under the oak tree where the children had built their first fort together. When their gazes met, the rest of the world seemed to disappear. The vows were written by themselves, sincere words of love, commitment, and gratitude for the path that had united them. When the justice of the peace declared them husband and wife, the applause and cheers of the guests mingled with the laughter of the children, who ran around throwing flower petals everywhere. During the small reception that followed, Robert found a moment to step away slightly, observing the scene from afar. Helen chatted animatedly with some guests, her new gold ring shining on her hand. Matthew and Sophia ran between the tables, clearly plotting some mischief. His mother sat under a tree, talking with Helen's mother, like old friends who had just reunited. It was a scene he had never imagined for himself, a future he had never dared to dream of. All because, on an ordinary day, he had done what his heart told him to do, without calculating consequences, without thinking of rewards. "What are you thinking about?" Helen's voice interrupted his thoughts. She had approached silently, wrapping her arms around his waist, her body warm and real against his. "About how life can change in an instant," he replied, pulling her closer. "About how the simplest gesture can alter the entire course of an existence." Helen smiled, that smile that still made his heart race. "Are you philosophizing at our wedding, Mr. Peterson?" "Just giving thanks," he replied, touching her face gently, as if he still couldn't believe he had the right to do so. "For you, for all of this. We both have a lot to be thankful for," she said softly, "and a lot ahead of us. A whole lifetime." Robert leaned in to kiss her, right there, under the afternoon sun, before all the guests who smiled and applauded. A whole lifetime. The words resonated in his chest like a promise, a path wide open ahead, luminous and full of possibilities. And as he embraced the woman who had become his present and his future, Robert thought of the strange and wonderful design of destiny. How life, even in its most difficult moments, never ceases to surprise those who keep their hearts open. How kindness, even when it seems to cost dearly, ultimately reveals itself to be the most valuable of investments. And how love, true and honest, always finds a way to flourish, even in the most improbable soils, in the most unexpected circumstances. On that perfect afternoon, under the clear and infinite blue sky, Robert finally understood. The world may not always be fair, but sometimes, just sometimes, it gets it perfectly right. And when that happens, all we can do is embrace the gift with open hands and grateful hearts, knowing that we do indeed deserve all the happiness that life generously decides to offer us.